Okay, so there we go. Um, all right, so now we're recording. So schedule to present, GitHub IDs, and then other. I know some of you are reaching out to others as possible speakers. I have to go back to the minutes to remind myself who was doing what. But does anybody have any updates relative to people that they've reached out to? Okay. All right. So hopefully after we have our site set up, and I'll follow up from our agenda as to who's supposed to be reaching out to what.
Yeah, Nicole, I
Um,
think I was going to reach out to someone, but I was a little unclear if you were ready and what
okay.
dates I should be, targeting. So I think I was going to reach out to the NPH group.
Okay.
So if you're ready, I can go ahead and reach out and just connect them to you.
Now I think the next after Jim and Tom present, I think the next meeting we're considering. I think you were going to present
Mhm.
about all of us, and then after that, our schedule's open. So,
Okay.
so I think you should be able to, give some dates for the next couple months, and then see what they can do. And I think we'll just try to fill as much, with the people we want to invite as we can, and in between, we can figure out what other business we can get done. So that sounds good. Thanks, Brandy. Then I noticed someone else called in. I see a phone number, but I'm not sure who it is. I just want to make sure I get you. So post in the chat or let me know who you are so I can add you to the attendance. All right, so I think that covers everything. Oh, hello.
Hi, sorry, Nicole. That 301 number is me. My
Oh, okay.
laptop.
All right. Well, there we
Sorry
go.
about that.
Thank you. All right. So if you're ready, Jim, I can. Do you have any slides or anything you want to show when you're going through?
Yeah, just two short ones.
Okay, great. All right, I'll stop sharing and then you can share those.
Thank you. Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Come on now. All right, can y'all see that?
Yes.
Value propositions and potential use cases. Initially, I had just a couple in mind, but the more I thought about it, there were a whole bunch here. So I'll go for the value propositions first and then talk use cases. And here are 9 big ones that I saw. If we start in the upper left-hand corner, we could avoid, and what I'm going to speak mostly about is cancer epidemiology cohorts, but of course it's true for any sort of cohort or similar observational study. Avoiding custom CDMs. Remember when we started building our data warehouse in 2014, the cloud computing partners said, well, what data model do you use? And I remember us saying, what? So there wasn't anything. We had to make our own, for lack of a better option. But of course, it'd be much better if people could just start using a common one from the beginning. Second one across the middle, we realized a couple of years into it that was not ideal. But as I've tried to include an aim or a sub-aim in different grant review and grant applications, including some to ITCR, where I said, one of the aims would be to map to OMOP, Odyssey Common Data Models. And for whatever reason, the reviewers, not one of them ever commented that on as a strength. And I got the sense that some didn't even sort of understand what it was referring to, but a very straightforward, value proposition there, saying this would be much better if the cohort were interoperable with others. You could avoid all this harmonization. And it just fell on completely flat reviewers' ears. Similarly, I'm not going to name names for obvious reason, but when I went to NCI program staff and said, if you want to have our teacher studies share even more of our data, how about additional funding so we can map to a common data model? And by that point, in talking with our partners at San Diego Supercomputer Center, they were very good, and they said, it's a mapping is a good thing to do, but it isn't something that you could just sort of squeeze in or do as an unfunded activity. If you're going to do it right. NCI staff, again, this is with the caveat, it was early days in the data commons. This is 2017, 2018, 2019. Just never got any kind of buy-in from program staff about the value of doing that. Avoiding custom harmonizations. I think this is the one where all of us, sort of little a, little o, little u, are familiar with, and we still get requests for this. Got another one 2 weeks ago, and all of these projects are going to have custom harmonizations, and I look at those as just huge time sinks. And you take one of the recent projects is a big multi-investigator cohort consortium-based data sharing activity, and you might look at the proposal, 6 different projects, 20 different cohorts, probably easily $1 million worth of person time that could be avoided on custom harmonizations if there were a common data model. Help eliminate data silos. And I hope this group won't mind me being frank about it, but I get the sense that a lot of cancer epidemiology cohorts don't mind having their data in data silos, and they're not upset about the lack of mapping to common data model, because those data silos are a way to protect the requests for funding and for things like requests for funding for harmonization. But on the bigger picture, those data silos shouldn't exist, and a common data model would help eliminate them. I think we could see even broader utilization of CECs. In some of our discussions with program staff, in all of our annual progress reports, our EAB meetings, we're asked to report, well, how many people are you sharing your data with who are outside of your existing network? With the idea that there's already sort of a closed community of cancer epidemiology cohort users, but it's a little bit closed off. And if we look across other NIHICs, there's a whole bunch of people who would be interested in our cohort data, but they look at it and say, well, it's all custom. It's a big learning curve to understand it. We hear that often as well. Our highest value data, because they're coded in custom ways and they're not in a common data model, they do require a lot of energy for someone to come in and understand and use in an analysis. If we use common data model, that would reduce a major barrier, I think, by other people who aren't initially part of the cancer epidemiology cohort world. The bottom 3 are more sort of politics, for lack of a better word. I think the adoption of a common data model would help remove the opposition by some data sharing opponents. And I would imagine some of you have seen some of these folks. We saw it to a pretty strong degree when we were first going from silos and CTS to our data commons. I think some of you have seen there's kind of a generational difference in the value of data sharing. I had people say to me, well, these cohort data are mine, and the original investigators are the ones who get to use them. The reason that we heard often given to that is that, well, these cohort data are complex, and because it's always been managed in this idiosyncratic way, i.e., it's never been put into a common interoperable data model. So because it's custom, you need to work with one of us. So you really need the expertise of someone who's been with it for a while, who can understand it. And from my perspective, that just perpetuates, continued sort of ownership and unproductive ownership of cohort data that could otherwise be more broadly and widely shared. Related to that, I know it's a strong word in the bottom middle column, but prevent data sharing extortion. We've seen it. We try not to practice that, but if someone has a custom data model and they're going to share it, then that's a good way to insist upon pretty high fees for sharing data on the premise that, well, you need to pay one of our people to harmonize it or to explain to you what's in the data dictionary. Now, to be clear, for some of these things, particularly on the bottom row, the lack of a common data model isn't the only component driving those three things. But from our experience over the last 10 years, it's a key part of it. And it would, it's one of the major pillars of that resistance, I think. And then reducing the data sharing conflicts as well. Again, we saw that certain individuals, and I would imagine this is true across their cohorts as well, they viewed certain parts of the data as their own fiefdom. And the more those data were isolated from the others in the cohort and from other cohorts, the more those could be the source of conflicts when it came to data sharing. And it's related to sort of the, how much of a value is it, how much time and energy should be spent sharing those data. But I have a strong belief that had a common data model been available for us, or had it been standard in the cancer epidemiology cohort world 10 years ago, a lot of that resistance to data sharing that we've seen, the data sharing extortion and conflicts about what's required to share data, how much should be shared, those conflicts would have been reduced, if not largely eliminated. And I think that transition could have been much easier for the field. Before I get to possible use cases, I'll stop there and answer questions. Any, or should I move to use cases?
Yeah, no, I think those are all. I think they're all pretty self-evident things that people have seen happen with their data or other data. And yeah, there's definitely politicking, and there are definitely people, and you get it, like you said, because your grants are associated with it. But yeah, there are definitely folks who will put off or avoid sharing data as long as possible. But definitely as a government agency, this is against our mission. Like, we're doing this for a larger audience. So I think these are all, and again, if you provide something that makes it easier, you whittle away at arguments for not doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate the candor and the opportunity to talk with you all frankly about this. The issues in the bottom row that I mentioned, they still surface. They came up on our cohort last week. I'm not going to name names, but we approached another group that is also required through its NIH funding to share data. And the request was, hey, there's a great opportunity to pursue this high priority question. Could we combine our cohort with this other resource? And well, we'll discuss and get back to you. And through a phone call, then they haven't put it down on paper yet, but they told us, well, someone who's personally involved in our project was part of that circle of people in the CTS who didn't want to remove our data silos and put in the data commons, and they're still angry about it. So no, we're not going to share data. So it's just complete, it's an 8-year-old retaliation bit.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That seems very immature. I don't want to play with you because I'm mad. Yeah, that's
precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. I have a 15-year-old who I talk about that with on the soccer field. I'm like, why am I doing this with a professor? It's crazy, but it's legit. And all right, well, let's get back to happier thoughts and use cases. But I do, as much as we're going to move to this, and I don't say this just to kind of air dirty laundry or point at people, and I've had a lot of these discussions with programs that have funded us. I mean, if as a field, we're going to do this, I think we need to just be prepared for the resistance that we know will surface. And not only that, but the kind of, the way that resistance will be framed. in the way it will be presented to people, not as just resistance, but as a bona fide barrier. All right. Use cases. I can refer to some of these, but again, for a cohort like ours that has linked to Medicare and to hospitalization data, and most of the other NCI-funded cohorts have great non-cancer data. You can just think of how much more sharing there could be across different ICs and centers of our cohort data within NIH. Same is true for international cohorts. If you put aside the challenges of GDPR, there is the additional burden of having to harmonize across different cohorts or multi-site overseas cohorts. But again, that would all be easier if everybody used sort of one single currency, one data currency. Pilot and exploring of data. It's been fascinating as we put out our data comments to see how much work people need to do to come in and sort of understand a cohort just to generate some simple frequencies. And we've tried to take on a lot of that work ourselves just to make that faster and better and smoother. But if new users came in with already an understanding of what the data model is, then there are even better ways that we could make data available to facilitate exploration, pilot, exploring numbers for grant applications, things like that. Bottom row, hugely expand reusability. I mean, think about it. Anything that a cohort does or that an investigator does that requires any kind of code or calculation could be hugely reused if that code or calculation use components of a CDM. And I've just made, 6 examples here. Like all the data cleaning workflows, all the data exploration workflows, sort of the table 0, the original, the concert diagrams, all of the data visualization tools. And if you've seen how many we have in the CTS, like imagine if all those were based on CDM rather than custom data. Complex analytic macros for exposure assignments, for calculating follow-up time. Data linkage algorithms. This was another huge source of tension on the CTS. Like we've been doing these linkages for years, and I kept asking, like, where's the code? I mean, it was always tucked behind a bunch of secret locks and things. And talk to NCI, like everyone who does a linkage with state cancer agencies. Now with the VPR, that's better. But all those data linkage algorithms include some decisions. What do you do with potential matches? What order do you rank those things? Those should all be standardized and common and more open. And then cohort selection, right? If you're selecting a cohort, and think of the work that goes into this for a multi-cohort core consortium project of just the data selection within each cohort using idiosyncratic data. That'd be way better. It could facilitate federated data analysis, which I presume a lot of you have seen as a priority in the new data science strategy. And by truly federated data analysis, right? If a project knew that everyone is using the same common data model, they could just send code with templates for covariates in it. And it would be much easier for the person holding the data to run those. And I think federated data analysis, if they're required, and they often are, could be done much better with CDM. And think of the data availability statements that we see in papers, right? More often than not, we read them and they say, well, can't be shared, contact the author, which then just kind of like go back to 0 or whatever, more like Monopoly, go to jail and sit there for a couple times. But if you could say, all this data was run with common data model, and then someone who was interested in reproducibility or expanding something else could go back and sort of facilitate the federated data analysis. They could already start to structure an analysis, understanding structure of those data and the coding and things. And I think all those things would be positive. I'm sure there are even more stuff there.
Definitely all very positive things that could come out of it. And I also think I think everybody here is probably aware of this, but one of the things that's come up with the budget cuts is that we've got to use the data we have. Now's the time. And so this facilitates that. Like anytime we when their budgets. And I liked what you said about data exploration and things. There's so much, it's such an untapped resource. And to have it all, easier to harmonize or harmonized and available for that. Then again, you also have grant writing opportunities and things for the, you get from the data exploration. But I think between the, policies that have to come down, reinforcing data sharing and, again, budget cuts and using the untapped resource, I think now is really the time to dig in and get it done for all of those reasons. So I think that's a very productive list. And and the other thing I want to throw in there is not just reusability, but reproducibility. And I know it's not officially the R in FAIR, but it's actually how I got into FAIR was challenges I and others had in my previous position, reproducing analyses, or you have papers coming out where information's not matching and you're trying to figure out why. And so things like sharing that code, even if you put together a different cohort or you are creating your derived variables differently, at least when you can see the other person's code and they can see your code, you can explain why analyses aren't matching. I think it's very confusing, and it's a big part of the public trust that results from the same data sets make sense. And so I'm definitely, I think that's something else that we can get out of this is the reproducibility. So Jim, was there anything else you wanted to share? Or was just those two slides?
Just those two slides. You did make me think of one other component as well. And I mean, I hope the discussion we had at NCI years ago on this topic has sort of moved on it, but we continue to get questions. Well, how expensive was it to adopt a data commons approach? And my answer from the beginning was always, regardless of the actual dollar amount, it's going to be cheaper than just paying people to continue to do manual things. And two, there's economies of scale, right? And if you look at data sharing, I've been very frank with program staff, but if you're telling us that we need to share more data, then those costs are just going to rise, either exponentially or linearly, because every additional data sharing requires all of that input from one. So the only way to get economies of scale is to reduce the amount that we spend on successive data sharing. And to me, CDM is one of the straightforward things that's right out there that would introduce economies of scale.
Tamara, I liked your question. What's the cost of not doing it, right? You do, like you said, Jim, you do these successive ones, way more expensive than doing it as a one shot. And the other thing is once it's done, it's done. It's, the whole point is not to have to redo it. And, they're, release updated versions and things, but the mapping to that is minimal compared to case by case mapping. So yeah, I think it's definitely long-term much more expensive not to.
Yeah, and I think you would get a kick out of this. Just one last comment. The most recent attempt of putting harmonization to CDM as a sub-aim in a project that was broadly focused on just hugely expanding data sharing. One reviewer commented in the summary statement, this proposal reads like a business proposition that is focused on increasing ROI rather than research. And I had that as a weakness. And I'm going to talk to the program officer tomorrow, but I'll be curious to see what he says. But I thought, yes, that is precisely what I put in, and it is what we should be thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good point. Yeah, a lot of personal experience to share. Yeah, and it's helpful because again, it's like basically it's a sales pitch, but an important one because there's also all the investment that was taken into creating the data sets in the first place. So how are you utilizing that investment if you're not sharing the data? Right. Well, thank you, Jim. Tom, are you ready?
Yeah, sure. So,
okay.
Sure. So good morning, everybody. I think this like is Jim's presentation. I think was this is something that it's nice to build onto what Jim was saying, because he definitely touched on a lot of like critical points. So I'm going to be talking about the breast cancer risk prediction project. So this is a something that I know some of you are familiar with, but for those of you that are not, this was originally an R01 that was submitted by Pete Kraft, who was at Harvard at the time, but has since then moved to NCI. He's here at DCG now. Nilanjan Chatterjee and Mia Gaudet, who was at ACS at the time, but is also now at DCG leading the Connect project along with Nicole and others, or Connect cohort, not just Connect project. But so some background on this project is that this is since NCI has become or DCG has become very involved with it, this was transition from an R01 to a U01. The goals of this project are to kind of down here to build a large-scale collaborative research resource on a large population of diverse women. All the studies that are participating in prospective cohorts, and the aim is to develop breast cancer risk prediction models for diverse populations, overall breast cancer, as well as ER positive and ER negative, and to eventually validate these in data from integrated healthcare systems. So what I'm showing here is the data platform for the project. This is a platform that collaborators and others are able to come and learn about the project, as well as request access to the data. What I'll be focusing on right now, since the project still is kind of in the early days, we're still collecting data, is to kind of focus on what data we're asking and to give you a sense of who's participating. So here you can see that we have, just kind of quickly scroll through all of this, we have over 20 cohorts. I think we're up to about 25 right now that are participating in this project, all cohorts from the NCI Cohort Consortium. Most of these cohorts are participating from North America, but select over here, you can see we do have a subset that are also participating in Europe. As Jim mentioned, these are cohorts that would be are under GDPR and will be participating in this project through federated analyses. So they can't as easily give access to the individual level data from their cohorts. So to include these data in the project, we'll be setting up some systems where investigators can go ahead and pipe in their analytic code into their data, and the results will be shared and can be meta-analyzed. Go over here and this is the data dictionary. So the way this project worked or is working right now is data dictionary was developed, which was largely based off other large consortium projects. So the Breast Cancer Association Consortium is a long-established breast cancer collaboration that has a data dictionary for this project that a lot of these cohorts that are participating in this breast cancer risk prediction project have also been participating in BCAC. So we thought, instead of coming up with a whole new custom data dictionary and handing it off to the cohorts and then kind of going through all the trials and tribulations that Jim was kind of talking about, of having to harmonize their cohort data to a completely new variable set, to try to make people's lives a little bit easier and give them a data dictionary with variables that a good number of them have already harmonized to. The variables that we're asking for are largely fairly well-established breast cancer risk factors, as well as information on the cases. So a lot of just pathological information, as well as mammographic density information. So fairly early on in this project, we kind of realized that this might be a good opportunity also to kind of think about trying to map these variables to a common data model. Oftentimes, as I'm sure you're all aware, within the NCI Cohort Consortium, these projects, like these collaborative projects, get developed, and they're fairly often like these one-shot projects, where you go ahead, you harmonize to a very specific project, and once that project's complete, all things like you put in a lot of time and effort, generated some great papers, but then things kind of fall off to the wayside. And then the next project comes along and you do it over again. So the idea that we were thinking about with this project is to try to create a research resource that could address the aims of the Breast Cancer Risk Prediction Project, but could also be a resource for people to come in and propose new ideas beyond the main aims. So to that end, we are thinking that we can go ahead and try to map these variables in the Breast Cancer Risk Prediction Project to some common data model to help in the endeavor of the reusability of these data. And it would also kind of be from Jim's talking about the California teacher study of harmonizing to a common data model. And that example or use case, that would be kind of working towards a common data model from the individual level cohort. From the Breast Cancer Risk Prediction Project's use case scenario, it would be coming sort of from the other end, where we are already a collaborative project. We can harmonize this collaborative project's data dictionary to a common data model, thereby kind of helping to facilitate the individual cohorts also potentially begin mapping to a common data model. So whatever variables that they harmonize to the Breast Cancer Risk Prediction Project data dictionary in their individual level cohorts, they'd kind of de facto be also mapping to a common data model if we were to go ahead and apply a common data model to this project. So that's kind of all I had planned to discuss about this, but if anybody has any questions, be happy to address them or try to.
Yeah. So Tom, where do you want this to go from here? So you have all this internal harmonization for the BCRPP, but where, like, what do you want that group to also be able to map to? Or they've already done all this mapping. Is the group generally feeling it's value added to also map to OMOP or another common data model?
Yeah, well, so right now, obviously, none of these variables are mapped to a common data model. We did, you were involved, Nicole, some early efforts to kind of take a look at what that landscape would look like. And as we all know, well, there's very little in the way of survey data that's already has a common data model. The pathology variables we found do map fairly well to SNOMED to some extent. But yeah, we're thinking, there's a lot of ways we could go with this, I think. But if the Breast Cancer Risk Prediction Project was mapped to a common data model, as I mentioned, there is the benefit of that kind of helps facilitate the individual cohorts in their efforts to map to a common data model. Like, it's a small number of subset of variables, but it's a start. But then that also facilitates the, we were kind of talking about like the reusability, reproducibility of data within the Breast Cancer Risk Prediction Project. It also helps, harmonize the data that's been shared with this project to other studies. All of us, UK Biobank, and other research resources out there that are also mapped to the same common data model. So I think it's there's a number of potential benefits, I think, from like kind of thinking of this as a potential use case for this working group. And
yeah, I agree. I just wanted to get to that specifically.
Yeah.
But it's also a really good example of sort of, maybe exponential isn't the right word, but I think, again, your group is all mapped to each other. You map to OMOP, then they're all mapped to OMOP. And then you kind of get this, like, I don't know, maybe a rock in a pond is a better example, but you kind of get this proliferating effect as it happens.
I was thinking of the cartoon snowball rolling down the mountain. Becoming,
that's good too.
Yeah, same idea. Yeah.
Oh, good example. Any comments, questions for anyone else?
I had one, and I agree with you, Nicole. Tom, I don't know if you were part of those conversations, but when Pete was still at Harvard and he was, we were talking about the CTS, I asked him just that that question, instead of going to harmonize, could we just start with these, whatever 20, 30 covariants from the CTS, and could we map to obviously OMOP? And I got the sense that, like a lot of folks, I didn't know anything about this stuff until someone introduced it to me. And I got the sense that he hadn't thought about it at the time. But the reason I ask it is, if you've been part of those conversations about kind of the pros and cons of mapping, that would be incredibly informative as we think about how do we communicate this to the rest of the community. Because I imagine the discussions you've had for this project, either internally at NCI or even with other cohorts, is exactly the kind of conversations that others are going to more broadly have. So I look at this project as it can be a great proof of concept to have a specific project with a relatively small number of variables, just adopt this idea of we're going to use an existing CDM, and it could really accelerate everyone's comfort level with what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's you might have been a little bit of ahead of the game at the earlier days, because I don't think it's probably like almost not quite a year, but like somewhere between like probably 9 and 12 months when I started getting involved in some of those conversations of like thinking about like, all right, how could we map this potentially to OMOP and the other common data model? So I kind of alluded to like we did some very early testing early on using some of the OMOPs has some software that they make freely available. So we looked at remember the name, Usagi, I think was the name of we used. And that's where it was kind of like we found like, okay, like at least for the variables that we have right now, like all your breast cancer risk factor variables, make a very small number, a couple of them we found potential variables that could be mapped into OMOP on there. So yeah, I think like the work that we do in here, I think, as you were saying, I'm hoping could be a nice proof of principle to kind of go back to the cohort consortium and say, hey, like we can do this, like this works, and there's all sorts of good benefits to doing this. Will make our lives a lot easier down the road, like just putting in this effort now. So I think at least from like within this project, I know like Pete and Nalanjan and Monty, they're obviously everybody's like gung ho on like full steam ahead on trying to the best we can to use this project as a use case to demonstrate to everybody the benefits of doing this.
And I'm hoping one of the other things, and this is going on a lot within DCEG, just because we're so focused on harmonization right now. But there are also more and more tools that I think are also going to help make this more palatable. So as part of a pilot or an example to get people on board, I think having some additional software to do it. So, we've got people on our team working on, IA-based code that helps with the mapping, across SNOMED and things like that. And eventually we'll expand it to do OMOP. On my team, we're working on software to just harmonize data, like harmonize the structure of data dictionaries and data organization so that it gets easier to compare your apples to apples and oranges to oranges, sort of as a pre-step for some of this harmonization. Also, as well as just easier data management and being able to explore across data dictionaries. And then also code to assign common or concept IDs with that. So hopefully, we continue, working on this over the next year or years, and our teams are also working on software to make this easier. We'll have an example project that, not only shows the benefits of doing this, but also says, this is not as heavy a lift as you think it's going to be. Still a lift, but, we're trying to make it as palatable as possible because we want, it benefits everybody for it to get done. Any other questions, comments?
Nicole, did we The next cohort consortium meeting, did you want to mention the working group?
Oh yeah, I was hoping Monty was going to be on the call to mention it, but we can mention it. And then I also still wanted to talk about the mission statement too before we called the call, so to speak. But I'll go ahead and bring that up. So the cohort consortium meeting is scheduled in November, I think the 14th and the 15th. And they've reached out about scheduling some of the work group meetings before then. And so we're having some internal discussions about starting an interoperability working group, and thought that maybe this group could kind of be the core, but also kind of help outline some objectives for that group. So we had something to sort of start off with when we met. So I appreciate everyone's commitment to this group. So I certainly don't want to stretch anyone beyond what they're willing to contribute. But since there's a lot of overlap in what we're trying to do, Muncie and us thought, well, maybe this would be a good group to kind of kick that group off with. You don't have to decide now, but in the coming months of it, yeah, if you'd like to contribute or join, we would be happy to have you. Like I said, help us come up with a direction, some objectives, similar to what we've been doing for this group. So did that cover it, Tom? Was there anything else?
Nope. I think it was it. Yeah.
So speaking of objectives, I did just want to make sure we touched on a couple things relative to the mission statement. So it's been posted for a while along with the OKRs. I've gotten feedback from several of you, but I just kind of I put the current version into the agenda for today, and just kind of wanted to make sure, see if there are any additional comments. Tamara, I incorporated a lot of yours, and I also left you some notes, so I appreciate you for looking at that. I also got a comment from Michael Cook, and one of the things we talked a little bit too is now, once we have our landscape analysis and we've got our use cases, what are the opportunities for funding it, because obviously we all don't have the bandwidth to sit down and do this ourselves. We're going to need support for it. So one of the things I've talked about previously is maybe we can crowdsource, similarly to what the CDM is doing for their documentation. But after my exchange with Michael, I was wondering if maybe we need to add another OKR about getting support, like, looking into grant opportunities, crowdsourcing, what other things we could do to get more support. Because I suspect, as we go through the landscape analyses and the use cases, we're going to tune in on what the priorities are, but we still need to find a way to support those. So I just want to see if there's any suggestions or feedback about adding that as another OKR.
I think
You
that
thumbs
sounds
up.
reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Figure it can't hurt. Tom, it almost looks like you've got a pipe the way you're holding your pen. It's like, yes, I'm gonna hold this over with my pipe.
Popping away on my pipe in my office.
All right, so it sounds like that's a okay idea. So I can add that, and of course, any of you have suggestions. I think it's likely, budget permitting, DCG will put up some funding for this because they're very invested in doing it. That's not official, but it's my, the impression I get from the support for like Tom and I putting time into the working group and things like that. So, and I also think they're funding opportunities within Odyssey to get money for them for support, and then hopefully we can brainstorm some other possibilities. Great. So I think that's all I had, unless anybody wanted to review anything specifically about the mission statement or the OKRs. All right, so I will go ahead and add this new one and send it out. And then if there's any other feedback, I'll that. And then that's what I'll plan to present on that May 7th meeting. And again, if anybody would like to attend who's not already signed up for the CDM invites, let me know and I can forward you the invite for that meeting. So I'm looking forward to sharing this with a larger group and getting some feedback. And then after that call and any feedback we would incorporate, then we would present at, and by we, I mean me, you don't have to do it unless you really want to the community call and share that out. And then we'll also probably, once it's shared out to the larger group, there might be some additional interest in joining the working group. But I like that we've kind of had a small group to start with, because sometimes too many chefs in the kitchen and you can't get anywhere. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Appreciate. Thank you, Jim and Tom, for presenting. Brandy, we'll hear from you next time. And then yes, if there was somebody you were going to invite, please do, because we meet twice a month, and so any date after Brandy's presentation is available. And I'll keep you posted on when our information is posted with the Odyssey group, as well as doing more to set up our wiki. If any of you want right access to the wiki, let me know. I just need your GitHub ID to give it to you. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Have
Nicole.
a great week. Bye.
Bye.